You are standing not in history's golden hall, but in its rotting basement. Greenwich Palace, July 1588. The sun blazes outside, but here, inside these ancient walls, the air is thick, warm, and wet with breath that should have died days ago. It smells like perfume and piss, like powdered roses dumped on a corpse, like sickness hiding beneath silks sewn by trembling hands. You hear laughter behind the great wooden doors, not the laughter of joy, but the brittle sound of power cracking under its own weight. Court whispers float like ghosts. And then she enters, Elizabeth Tudor, the Virgin Queen, Gloriana. Her face painted white like marble, but cracking. Her teeth, the color of rusted copper, show beneath a smile that could conquer empires. The pearls on her gown gleam brighter than her eyes, which no longer sleep. This is the woman the world feared, the woman who danced with death and made kings kneel, the woman who ruled England for 45 years. But what if I told you that the true enemy was not Spain, not treason, not even time? It was her own reflection, her own skin, her own scent. She waged war against decay and lost beautifully, publicly, tragically, because beneath that jeweled mask was not a queen, but a corpse in slow motion, a walking monument to rot wrapped in velvet. And this story, this stench, has been hidden for too long. Today, we unseal the tomb, not of her body, but of her truth. So breathe deep, because the fragrance of empire is not always sweet. Part 1. The living corpse, named Gloriana. She was England's sun, or so the poet said, that blinding orb that rose above war and whispers, the flame that burned away the dark of uncertain man. She stood alone on the world's stage, unmarried, untamed, undefeated, wrapped in lace and legend, a woman who wore power like a second skin. But that skin was rotting. Beneath the pearls and parchment, beneath the sermons and the silks, Elizabeth Tudor's flesh had begun to betray her. Not in some dramatic biblical collapse, but slowly, cruelly, like fruit left too long on a golden plate. Her hygiene, such as it was, followed no logic known to modern minds. She bathed not when she smelled, nor when she bled, nor when her own skin itched with the accumulation of filth, but once every 3 months. Whether I needed or not, she famously declared, this was not cleansing, it was choreography, a performance of purity for a court steeped in rot. The ritual began with copper tubs dragged noisily across stone floors by sweating servants. The water they filled it with hissed with heat, drawn not from alpine springs, but from the Thames, a river swollen with piss, plague, slaughterhouse blood, and the ghost-thick runoff of London's workshops. When the tub steamed, the Queen stepped in. Steam rose like incense around her naked form. It smelled not of lavender, but of metal, ash, and faint decay. Soap was brought forth, a brutal concoction of rendered animal fat, wood ash, and lye so crude it stripped more skin than dirt. They scrubbed her gently, but not too gently. The Queen was not made of glass, after all. She was made of legend, and legends bleed behind closed doors. 90 days passed between such ablutions, and in that time, her body told its own story, a tale of sweat that turned sour, of perfume that clashed with decay, of silks soaked in secrets too shameful to name. You knew she was coming long before she arrived. Her scent preceded her like a herald, a fanfare of rot beneath the powdered rose. Foreign diplomats, trained in the art of deception, could not mask their discomfort. One clutched a pomander of crushed cloves to his face, a talisman against nausea. Another's wife fainted during a formal banquet, not from heat, but from the rank breath of the Virgin Queen. Ah, yes, her smile, immortalized in portraits, but never truly seen. By her 40s, Elizabeth's teeth had darkened to the color of ruin. Not yellow, not brown, black. Black as coal, black as warships, black as her empire's sins. The culprit? Sugar, that glistening vice more valuable than silver and far more lethal. She consumed it by the handful, the mouthful, letting it dissolve over hours, coating her gums in royal sweetness until her teeth cracked under the weight of luxury. Some shattered mid-meal, leaving fragments of blackened enamel in her wine. Still, she smiled. Still, she ruled. No toothbrush, no floss, only rinses of rosewater and wine, acidic, sugary elixirs that quickened the decay. Ambassadors sent letters home not about the politics of succession or the shape of treaties, but about her breath. They wrote of it with horror, with awe. One likened it to a battlefield 3 days after the bodies had stopped moving. Another said he held his breath through their entire audience, lest the Queen's exhale wither him where he stood. Her hair, the famous red crown of Gloriana, was long gone by her 30s, burned away by the very whiteness she wore with pride, a cosmetic paste of vinegar and white lead that poisoned her scalp as it brightened her skin. In its place, she wore wigs, heavy, elaborate, constructed from the hair of peasant girls who sold their youth strand by strand to survive. The wigs arrived tangled, lice-ridden, and reeking of labor. They were never washed, only brushed, powdered, and re-perfumed. Each one was a mausoleum for parasites, and underneath, wounds. The Queen's scalp was a battlefield of sores. Lead blisters oozed pus beneath silk nets. Rusting pins bit into raw flesh. Fungus bloomed in the damp between powdered layers. But she wore them proudly, clung to them like they were halos. She called them her glory. She called them her flame. But those close enough to smell her knew the truth. Gloriana, the eternal Queen, was dying, not all at once, but one unwashed strand at a time. And yet, no one dared speak it. No one dared wrinkle a nose or turn a cheek. For to name the rot was to name the crown. And in England, crowns were sacred, even when they stank. Part 2, the mask of poisoned beauty. They called her radiant, said her skin glowed like alabaster kissed by moonlight. But alabaster does not bleed, and alabaster does not rot. They only saw the surface, the divine illusion she forged each morning from dust and denial. Not a ritual of prayer, not a rehearsal of power, but a performance of preservation, a resurrection. Every day, the Queen of England, the Virgin Queen, Gloriana, the Lioness of Empire, would die in her sleep and claw her way back into myth with a brush and a bowl of poison, the alchemy of disappearance. She dipped a sable brush into the white, not the white of purity, but of death disguised as elegance. Vinegar and lead, ground fine as ash, mixed into a paste that hissed quietly on her skin. It burned. It bit into open sores. It seeped into cracks already there from the day before. But she kept painting, layer after layer, toxic snow upon rotting earth, a burial performed in reverse. Her hands moved like a priestess preparing a body for sacrifice. Only the body was her own, and the sacrifice was time. She painted away every weakness, every bruise, every freckle, every wrinkle, anything that hinted at mortality. To be a woman was dangerous. To be a woman in power was heresy. But to appear immortal, that was invincible. What the mirror could not forgive, the paint dried like armor. But unlike steel, it cracked, split along cheekbones, flaked near the lips, tiny betrayals of the flesh beneath, and beneath, blood, pus, skin rubbed raw by years of pigment and denial. The mask was not removed, not really, just buried deeper each day until her face was a mausoleum of layered decay. When it finally came off, if ever, it did not wash. It ripped. Ivory combs scraped it loose, like chipping frost from the face of a corpse. The paint came off in sheets, but skin came with it. What remained was not a face, it was a wound, still smiling. The mouth of flies. Her lips, too, were painted with crushed cochineal beetles, boiled down into vermilion paste, then blended with rancid oil. On cold days, it clung like wax. On warm ones, it curdled. Each word she spoke came laced with the scent of decaying sweetness, like wilted flowers left too long in stagnant water. Yet she still spoke, still smiled, still commanded, because power does not pause for rot. Lead in the blood, madness in the mind. But the poison crept deeper. It seeped past skin, into muscle, into bone, into memory. She began to forget. First, small things, names, faces, whether she had eaten that day. Then came the trembling hands, the sudden outbursts, the long silences staring at nothing, the shrieks at empty corners of her chamber. She trusted no one, not even her own reflection. Eventually, the mirrors were veiled, because what looked back was no longer Elizabeth. It was what remained after 40 years of conquest, 40 years of deception, 40 years of trying to look like a god while slowly dying as a woman. Perfume as prayer. So she turned to perfume, not just to smell sweet, but to smother the truth. Civet musk from African cats, frankincense and rose oil from distant lands, myrrh, ambergris, powdered petals, and oils thick as blood. She poured them on like baptism. Her skin drank them in greedily, layering over sweat, over wounds, over death. But perfumes, too, rot. And the result was no longer fragrance. It was punishment. A smell so sweet it turned bitter, like incense burned in a charnel house. Untouchable. They called her untouchable, divine, ethereal, otherworldly. But no one touched her because they loved her. They avoided her because she stank. The gowns were heavy with it, the sheets saturated, the throne haunted. To be near her was to taste iron on your tongue, to feel something ancient and sick crawling up your nose, to wonder whether you were speaking to a queen or to the very idea of death, still clinging to a body it should have left behind. And still, they bowed, they curtsied, they praised her glow, because none dared be the one to say aloud what everyone already smelled. End of expanded part 2. She ruled by myth, not mercy, but myths too begin to smell when left unwashed. Part 3. Gowns of gold, stained with flesh. She wore beauty like armor, not to protect herself from swords, but from the truth. Each gown was a declaration of power, a masterpiece tailored not for comfort, but for control. Velvet, the color of blood at dusk. Silk imported at great cost, embroidered with thread spun from whispers and silver. Pearls sewn like teardrops from the sea's memory. Gold laced through every fold like veins in a corpse. From afar, she was magnificent. Up close, she was a mausoleum sewn shut with gemstones. The dresses that were never washed. Over 3,000 gowns hung in her chambers. None were ever washed, not once. To cleanse them would be to unmake them. The fabric was too delicate, the embroidery too sacred, the price too steep. So they were aired, brushed, and doused in perfume like a corpse prepared for a royal funeral. But perfume does not conquer sweat. It does not erase blood. It only mingles, like roses blooming from rot. She wore the same dress for days, sometimes weeks, because it brought her luck, she claimed, because changing it would mean acknowledging the filth within. Beneath the silk, a linen shift, yellowed and stiff as old parchment. Beneath the shift, a corset, whalebone, steel, and cruelty. So tight, it pressed lungs into silence and bowels into protest. The body beneath could not breathe, but it could sweat, it could rot, and it did. A fabric of flesh. The gowns were pale. Ivory, silver, moonlit gold, colors that betrayed every sin. By evening, each gown bore the marks of war, a crimson splash of wine, a streak of pus from a sore too deep to dry, a brown shadow of blood that had seeped, dried, and been ignored. Each stain was a secret, each thread a confession, but no one dared speak of it. Servants who handled her dresses did so with gloved hands and turned faces. Some said the fabric burned their palms. Others claimed the stench clung to them for days. The dresses became flesh-bound books, recording her decline in stitches and stink. To the court, they were symbols of glory. To the servants, they were cursed relics. The monarch and her mold, her gowns weighed 50 pounds, and she wore them like penance. They trapped heat like coffins. They turned her wounds into warm swamps. They soaked up sweat and decay until fabric became skin and skin became memory. Her limbs swelled from infection. Her skin blistered beneath the weight. Her wounds, denied air or healing, festered beneath brocade. She cooked inside her crown. Her shoes, masterpieces from Italian leather decorated with rubies and holy envy, trapped blood and pus from cracked, blackened toenails. They reeked so deeply, ambassadors described the scent in cipher. Her stockings, made of silk, were never cleaned. They hardened with filth, crusted over with sweat and dead skin. They tore when she moved, revealing yellowed feet like overripe fruit. And yet she walked, with posture untouched by pain, chin high, eyes distant. As if beneath the folds of her gown, nothing screamed. As if rot were not whispering through every seam. Heaven on the surface, hell beneath the stitch. When she moved, her gowns rippled like divine waters. When she entered a room, light shimmered off her shoulders as if angels themselves bowed before her. But the scent arrived first. It crawled in ahead of her, a mixture of old perfume, fresh sweat, blood, and something no one dared name. A royal stench draped in diamonds. The walls of the palace held their breath, the air recoiled, the floorboards wept with every step she took. But still they bowed, still they praised, because her beauty was not mortal, and her rot was no one's business but the crown's. Part 4. The Queen's Stomach, a Kingdom in Revolt. She dined like an empress, but digested like a corpse. Each feast was a masquerade, opulence laid out on silver trays, servants tiptoeing through incense-scented halls, music from lutes trembling like fear. Roasted swans glistened under honey glaze, candied oranges shipped from ports drenched in blood, venison marinated in wine darker than her gums, dozens of courses, hours of chewing, or pretending to chew. But beneath every bite, her body whispered a quiet rebellion. It did not want luxury, it wanted mercy, and it would not wait politely. Poisoned from within, there were no refrigerators, no understanding of bacteria, only spice to bury the smell of meat that had already begun to turn, only fire to mask the death laced into each cut. She ate because it was expected, because to not eat was weakness. And queens were never weak, but every dish was a gamble, a roll of the gut. Would it pass quietly? Would it writhe? Or would it explode into agony? And then there was mercury, that ancient alchemical lie offered by trembling physicians as a cure for syphilis or fever or something no one dared name. She drank it like holy water, and it hollowed her out from within. It burned the lining of her stomach, tore at the walls of her intestines, turned every meal into a countdown, not to satisfaction, but to suffering. The gas of Gloriana, they never spoke of it, not openly, but they all heard it. The gurgling beneath the gown, the sudden, sharp intakes of breath, the way her hand would drift to her belly mid-sentence, as if trying to still the riot within. After banquets, there were often long silences, not of reflection, but of containment. Sometimes she would excuse herself. Headache, they'd whisper. Fatigue. But everyone knew. The truth drifted behind her like smoke. Her flatulence was infamous, not human, ruinous. Ladies in waiting learned to faint on cue. Young pages invented reasons to vanish. Ambassadors wrote home in delicate metaphors, comparing her presence to the aftermath of cavalry in summer heat. And when she left the room, the air remained tainted, ashamed, thick as soup, hunger and shame. By her final years, she could no longer chew, not because of age, but because her teeth had surrendered. Rotten, crumbling, black like ash left in the fireplace too long. Bread turned to shrapnel in her mouth. Fruit, an act of violence. So she drank her meals. Broths made from bone and mystery. Elixirs thick with marrow and crushed roots. Medicinal wines, spiced until nearly bitter. But even these brought no peace, only cramps, trembling. Long hours of sitting still, praying the body would not betray her before the court. And sometimes she did not eat at all, not from vanity, not from asceticism, but from a deep and familiar fear. Fear of the next eruption. Fear of the smell that might slip past the silks. Fear of the sound that might follow a toast. Fear that just once someone would look at her not as a sovereign, but as a sick old woman wrapped in velvet with a throne beneath her and a chamber pot too far away. A machine in decline. She was a system failing itself, an empire made flesh. But the gears no longer turned smoothly. The stomach twisted, the bowels groaned, the throat burned, the breath soured. She became a creature of reaction, to pain, to pressure, to shame. Even her posture changed, straighter than ever, a spine like steel, not from pride, but from necessity. If she bent, something might slip. Part 5. A throne of perfume and putrefaction. She reigned for 45 years, longer than most could dream, long enough to bury rivals, outlive husbands she never married, and redraw the very map of Europe in her favor. They called her Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, the untouchable flame atop England's iron altar. But by the end, she ruled not a kingdom, but a stench. Not an empire of people, but an empire of rot. The crown reeks. Her body had become myth, but her smell had become legend. It didn't arrive all at once. At first, it was subtle, a hint of wilted flowers, a breath of old wine left too long in a chalice. Then it grew, stronger, thicker, more demanding. It curled beneath her arms, where sweat mingled with clotted perfume. It lingered beneath her wigs, where sores wept into lace. It pooled between her toes, where fungus festered in silk. It rose from her breath, sweet, metallic, infected. It soaked her bed, her gowns, her very throne. Everything she touched remembered her, not in sight, but in scent. And so she fought back, with musk, with incense, with oils distilled from distant lands and stranger beasts, civet scraped from the anal glands of wildcats, ambergris, vomit of the whale, myrrh wept from wounded trees, frankincense, rose, violet, all forced into communion. Each perfume decayed at its own pace. Some soured with heat, others turned bitter in the folds of cloth. Together, they formed a cloud of contradictions, a garden of rot, a funeral procession in full bloom. By midday, the scent was unbearable. By nightfall, divine. She was a cathedral that smelled of incense and blood, of worship and ruin. The bed that never slept her bed was a monument, a carved canopy of oak and gold, hung with curtains woven from coin-weighted silk. But no amount of splendor could hide the truth. It was not a bed, it was a coffin with cushions. The linens, stiff from months of sweat, pus, and ointments, crackled like parchment when touched. The mattress, never cleaned, never replaced, had become a sponge for royal decay. Soaked with blood from cracked lesions, stained with urine from nights when her body betrayed her, scented with perfumes that turned rancid in the dark. The air in her chamber was so thick it could be chewed. Servants opened windows even in frost. Some gagged, some refused entry, some whispered prayers before approaching. And she lay there, eyes open, unmoving, a queen in velvet slowly turning to mildew. Death without dignity. In her final years, she became a stranger to her portraits. Her skin, once painted white with care, had taken on a greenish hue, the color of rot beneath damp marble. Her teeth, once black, were now gone. Her mouth sagged. Her breath reeked of copper and death. Her scalp bled where wigs chafed raw flesh. The sores never healed, only dressed, powdered, and forgotten. Her thoughts unraveled. She forgot names. She laughed at ghosts. She screamed at mirrors. She wept over misplaced wigs as if mourning lost children. She clawed at her face in frustration, scratched until she bled, then begged for more paint, more perfume, more silence. And when death finally came, March 24th, 1603, it arrived not as a thief, but as a housekeeper, come to air out the chambers, to clean what power had refused to touch. They unwrapped her like a secret and found not a queen, but a relic, bloated with time. They sealed the rooms, burned the sheets, buried the gowns, and yet the scent remained. It lingered in tapestries, in floorboards, in the very dust that drifted through her palace halls. The queen, beneath the crown. Now you stand again in the shadow of Greenwich. The garden is green, the halls are polished, the portraits are clean, but smell has memory, and history has breath. She was married to no man, but she was never truly alone. Her truest companion was decay. It followed her into battle, into court, into bed. It wore pearls with her, slept beside her, cried with her. She ruled with perfume in one hand and poison in the other. And when all was done, when Spain had been broken, when poets had exhausted their praise and time had exhausted her flesh, it was not war that defeated her, not age, not betrayal. It was the mirror, that cold, polished glass that showed her not the queen she built each morning, but the woman who had been dying for decades.